Okay, today's Q&A is about poultry, and the question is, what does it take to make a kosher chicken? So let's just start with general with birds, and that is that the Ashkenazi custom is we only eat the breeds of poultry that we have a Masorah that they're kosher. Sfarim are more makel about that, but it means that although most chicken breeds are okay, and the common turkey that we use is also assumed to be kosher, there's only a couple of breeds of geese and ducks that there's a reliable Masorah. So for the names of it, the mallard, pekin, and runner ducks are kosher, and the white Emden and gray Toulouse geese are kosher. But most people will not accept Muscovy and Moulard ducks as kosher. Okay, so anyhow, now we have our kosher bird. We'll focus on chickens. We have a kosher chicken. There's three steps that it takes to make it kosher: shchita, bedika, and malicha. So shchita for chicken is a little bit different than for an animal in that the shaykhid holds the chicken in his hand, sometimes with someone helping him, holding the other end of the bird, as opposed to an animal shchita. The animal is usually in a pen during the shchita. Okay, now moving to bedika. Bedika means we check an animal to make sure that there isn't some kind of a issue, a defect that would make the animal into a treifa. If it's a treifa, meaning it wouldn't be kosher. And the Rambam says that in his days there was no such things. Such problems were such issues were so uncommon with birds that it was unheard of that someone would check a bird to see if it was a treifa. It was like there's no such thing. But that's not the way it works nowadays anymore. And just about every slaughterhouse has some kind of a setup for checking for these things. I mentioned a couple of things that they check for. One is called tzomas hagidin. That is if the leg tendons are ripped. That would make the animal into treifa. Another one is called the Meckel's diverticulum, which is a part of the intestines. They check for a hole in the intestines in that particular spot because of this Meckel's diverticulum. And another one is called the buka da'atma, which is basically a dislocated hip. And there's a couple of little ones that some people do or don't check. So in these, just about every kosher slaughterhouse, has people who check a certain amount, more or less, or some kind of a setup for checking for these things, to find out if the bird is actually treifa. And the last thing about malicha is that malicha is a drop more complicated for chicken than it is for animals, and that's because, first of all, we have to make sure all the internal organs are removed beforehand so that the salt can be in contact with the meat. We cut the wingtips, and also we have to make sure that salt gets onto the inside. If you think of a chicken, it has like this cavity on the inside, and you have to pay extra attention to make sure salt gets over to there. And then once you have the chickens already all in salt, they have to be set up basically in a good way so that the blood can drain out of that cavity and doesn't collect in it. If you be on its side, blood would collect into sort of like a puddle in the inside of it. Now, as far as consumers, the most common issue that consumers have is if they'll find that the narrow end of the chicken drumstick, like the far end of it, will be red, and it looks like that's blood. They call those red legs, and in most cases they're not a kashrus concern. Usually it's not an issue, but if you notice one that seems particularly dark or red, much more than usual, then you should bring it to a rabbi to ask him whether it's an issue or not. Okay. Another thing that people might notice with their chickens is when it has a broken bone. Now, if a bone breaks while the chicken is alive, there are many situations where that would make the chicken into a treifa. But in most cases, when it breaks, the breaking that happens after the shchita, which would not be a kashrus concern. And second is that in most slaughterhouses, they have people whose job it is to look for chickens that have these kind of problems, look for the ones that have broken bones or that look like their bones were broken before they were shechted. And remove those and make sure those don't get told as kosher. Again, if you find one with a broken bone that looks particularly bloody or somehow unusual, you should show it to your rabbi to tell you whether it's okay or not.